So, Dr. Kruger talked about a lot of things when it came to domestic violence and interpersonal violence, but I was just going to talk about some of the things that still stood out to me, even like days after our lecture. So, one of the first things I remember is that, or like one of the things that stood out to me that I wrote down is that when she was asking like what some of our fears or like worries were, is that someone mentioned is like doing or saying something that's like more detrimental than like helpful. And it was kind of really reassuring and like comforting to know that she said that even like professionals like feel this way, like they also get nervous or fear that like what they do or say um or what they may do or say is wrong, um because it just kind of shows that like we're all human. And it's like the professionals are worried about that, like me as just like a listener. Well, I know like we're not giving advice at like the stand. I just mean like even in like everyday occurrences, like as a listener or friend or whoever like I may be to the other person sharing, that it's okay like if I mess up, because professionals also feel this way. So but moving on like from that, we would start talking about things like we can do with our listening to help this individual who may be experiencing this. And like one of the things that like really stood out to me is just to tell them that they're brave, because it's just hard. Like they're brave to share their story and to actually talk about it. And I actually even like wrote down and I put like no advice with like an exclamation point. And I think that like I think that's also for not just the listening post, is like don't try to give advice always, because we can't fully understand what it is. And I don't think we can always give advice for something that we don't understand and know fully. So to avoid making the situation worse, or to make them think like it's not that big of a deal, or like we could even come close to understanding what they're going through, don't think we can give advice. But I also wrote down resources, so it's good to know that there are resources out there for people who are experiencing this, and like professionals that can help them, that I can tell them to like go talk to. I know we talked about the cocoon for like a hot second in the beginning, and so I think that's just kind of nice, that she like pointed out. It's like just tell them that they're brave. She said like she pointed out like validation was like a really important thing that I think can get overlooked because we might just be too focused on trying to give advice or something like that. Is that we just forget to tell them like this is hard and you did this and you should be proud of yourself for that, and you're gonna like get through this at some point. But to maybe like point them in the right direction of people who can actually help them, instead of like trying to do it myself. I guess it kind of relieves that pressure from me, and well, help them in the long run, because I can't say a lot on the matter. I don't even know what kind of advice I would give. Um, so I guess this was nice. Is that like I don't know what advice I would give, and so like Dr. Kruger being like, you don't need to like just validate them and just be there for them, but point them to someone like who can, you know. And then I also liked how we talked about how the victim may blame themselves, and that we shouldn't argue with that, because that's like how they may feel like a sense of control. And so like we shouldn't argue. And I even like wrote down and says maybe say I don't think you deserve that. So it was kind of nice that Dr. Kruger gave us like an alternative thing to say, instead of like arguing, because I never knew like arguing with them. I mean, I guess I just never knew like telling them that they shouldn't blame themselves is could be detrimental, because you can be like stripping away that only sense of control that they feel. And so, and like I never even like thought of it that way, so I thought that was like really cool that she said that. um it was also interesting that they don't want like too many people like women on jury when the women in the situation has been assaulted, um because to make them feel safe as a juror and a woman, um, they would have like the mindset of like the women must have done something to make them feel safe. So I thought that was interesting. Um, I really like the part where Dr. Kruger talked about the she was asking for it saying, and she talked about a whole story, how this guy was like, she must have been asking for it, and she turned around and she's like, would you do it? And it was just, and then like shut him up, and I was like, that is such a good response, because it's like people always say like she must have, like, she was asking for it, or she must have done something to ask for it. And I've always like seen comments like that, and I never even know how to respond, because I'm just like, I was always like, no matter what I say, like, they're not going to think differently. But that was a good way to do that, because it's like, who's going to sit there and say they would like violate someone like that? And so I just thought that was a really like, that was like snaps to that. And so she talks about like, that's the difference between, or the difference between getting raped and not, is whether someone decides to rape. And so it was just kind of like interesting for her to talk about it that way, because a lot of times in like society now, like, people aren't talking about it like that, but that's really what it is. And that's like a really good way, if I see someone comment like that, that I can say something and actually feel like it might even mean something and make a difference after that. So I really like that part when we started talking about that. Just like that whole story, it was just like, yes, you know. Um, and then we, like, to continue with that, we talked about how it might have been her choice to be vulnerable in that moment, but it was everyone else's choice to take advantage of that. And so I thought that was kind of like a really cool way to think about like the same thing we just talked about. Like, she was asking for it. We can talk about how like she let herself like maybe she did wear like tight or short clothing, and she was maybe drunk or whatever, and she could have been in like a bad situation, I guess. But um if everyone around her in that situation decides to not rape her, like, she's not going to get raped. So I just thought that was a different way of looking at it, and that makes a lot of sense, to the point where people can't really argue with that unless they say they would rape her. And then you probably just shouldn't talk to that person, and probably should tell everyone to stay away from them. So I just really hope I can remember that in a situation where someone starts to say like, well, she was asking for it, because I could turn around and be like, well, would you do it in that situation, you know? And if they say no, it's like, well, then why did they? And it's like, maybe, yeah, she put herself in that situation, but like, they didn't have to take advantage of that. And that's the reason why she got raped or whatever, is because they took advantage of that situation, not because she did anything. Like, nobody does anything to get raped. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Kruger said that, like, in the lecture too, is that nobody does anything to get raped. And so I just think it just like blows my mind that people think that way sometimes. And so this was a really efficient way, I suppose, to shut that down. Lastly, another thing that really stood out to me is when she brought up the cutouts. I forget the name of them specifically, but those, I want to say, are like really cool, but it's very sad at the same time. But I think that's why it like really stuck with me, because it was just so real in that moment. Like, when you can see that body and read that story, and it's like, this isn't just a story. Like, this was reality, you know? Like, this was some families and friends' reality, that happened to their family member or friend. And I just think it's really important to like remind myself, like, when we're talking about things like that, like this, is that it's not just like something like, I'm gonna need to shut down. Like, this is like a real problem, and that can really affect people, obviously, in terrible ways. But I think those like really make an impact, the cutouts, because I think those could really sit with somebody, because like, it just shows the reality of them.